Pope Francis recently stated that Christ is no longer the center of the Church. This declaration will inevitably lead to controversy and division. In response, the Pope has called theologians from all over the world to create a new theology, a project that is making many people nervous. It seems that everything is being touched: liturgy, faith, mission. Are we perhaps at the beginning of a historic transformation, or do we risk compromising the very essence of the Church? Stay with us to learn more. When Pope Francis says that Christ must return to the center, he's navigating a complex situation. Surprisingly, even some traditionalists agree that Christ is no longer at the center of the Church, but they see it differently. For them, the root of the problem goes back to the Second Vatican Council, which they believe shifted the focus from the sacred to the secular, from God to man. Key examples would be the Mass celebrated facing the people, receiving communion in the hand, and the introduction of innovative practices such as altar servers and lay preaching. According to traditionalists, restoring God's centrality requires a return to the liturgical and doctrinal practices that existed before the Council. But Pope Francis doesn't seem to agree with this view. For him, focusing on Christ should be understood through history. There have been times when the Church has moved away from Christ's message to focus on human traditions. From there, the importance of the Second Vatican Council, which would have had the task of correcting this deviation, opening the way to a renewal that continues today through the Synod on Synodality. The recent meeting with the International Theological Commission represents a decisive step in this direction. Pope Francis has challenged theologians to develop a new theology of synodality. But what does synodality actually mean? For the Pope, it's a process that involves all of God's people in understanding and carrying out the Church's mission, promoting active and inclusive participation. From this perspective, putting Christ back at the center does not mean going back to traditional ways, but rather a new understanding of the Church's role in today's world. Francis envisions an open community, capable of engaging with different cultures and responding with missionary courage to modern challenges. However, this approach continues to raise doubts and concerns among many Catholics. They fear that this is more of a drift towards modernism than a true return to Christian roots. Critics of Pope Francis's vision of synodality worry that it could open the doors to relativism, compromising the universality of the faith with cultural adaptations that risk taking the Church away from its traditional roots. The idea of a new theology fuels these concerns even more, making people think of a Church that, instead of guarding and passing on the deposit of faith, seeks to reinvent itself to respond to the pressures of the modern world. Actually, synodality is not a new idea. Historically, it has always been understood as a way to involve the faithful, ensuring, however, that the teachings of the Church remained the solid point of reference. Pope Francis, however, seems to be pushing for a broader and more inclusive synodality. That is not limited to just listening, but encourages a renewal that affects not only the structure of the Church, but also its very theology. A central moment for this vision is the upcoming Jubilee, during which the 1700th anniversary of the Council of Nicaea will be commemorated, which established the consubstantiality of the Son with the Father. Francis considers that council a beacon of faith that illuminates the present, but he does not intend to limit himself to a commemoration. His interpretation is projected towards the future, a contemporary application that addresses the conflicts, the divisions, and the injustices of the world. For the Pope, putting Christ at the center means promoting a vision of fraternal humanity rooted in God's love and committed to building a more just and peaceful world. However, this perspective raises doubts among those who fear that the spiritual mission of the Church is being replaced by a social project based on humanitarian values. For traditionalists, the Church's priority is the salvation of souls through conversion and the sacraments, not the creation of a paradise on earth. Another controversial point is the cultural paradigm proposed by Francis, which is based on the figure of Christ as inspiration to reform human and social relationships. According to the Pope, the Church must become a model of justice, peace, and hope in the world. But some fear that this emphasis runs the risk of reducing the spiritual dimension of faith to a mere social initiative, losing sight of divine transcendence. In this context, Francis's drive towards a more inclusive synodality seems to be the prelude to a radical change in the Church's theology. This new theology, as the Pope himself has declared, is necessary to accompany the missionary phase that the Church is preparing to face. But the question remains, is this an evolution that will strengthen the faith, or a step towards a modernism that will dilute its essence? Pope Francis's call to develop a new theology of synodality has sparked an intense debate within the Church. While some see it as a necessary step to make the Church more modern and inclusive, others fear it represents a potential departure from the unchanging principles of the Catholic faith. For traditionalists, the word new already sounds like a warning sign. The Catholic faith is based on an unchanging divine revelation and a tradition that has evolved organically over the centuries. Any attempt to create a new theology is perceived by many as a risk of compromising with the cultural pressures of the present. This fear is intensified in light of some statements by Pope Francis, who often stresses the urgency of adapting the Church to the needs of the modern world, promoting continuous dialogue with diverse disciplines and cultures. Another controversial issue is the consistency of the concept of synodality. On one hand, it promotes listening and participation of all voices within the Church. On the other hand, we see how some critics of Francis's reforms have been marginalized or sidelined. Episodes like the dismissal of bishops or priests who have expressed disagreement raise doubts about the true openness of a synodal and inclusive Church. Another point of friction is the perception that this emphasis on the new ignores the immense richness of the Church's tradition. Traditionalists insist that Catholic theology doesn't need to be reinvented, but rather rediscovered and deepened. They maintain that the recovery of preconciliar liturgical and doctrinal practices would represent the true way to return Christ to the center, avoiding giving in to passing fads or cultural pressures. The question of liturgy is particularly divisive. For many Catholics, the liturgy is the beating heart of church life, the moment when the community comes together to celebrate the mystery of Christ. But which liturgy? Here, the views differ greatly. Pope Francis and his supporters propose a liturgical adaptation that reflects the cultural diversity and sensitivities of the faithful around the world. Examples like the so-called Mayan Rite, which incorporates elements of indigenous traditions, or other forms of liturgical enculturation, are presented as necessary steps to make the liturgy more accessible and meaningful for local communities. However, for critics, these experiments risk distorting the universal character of the liturgy, diluting its sacredness in favor of an approach too closely tied to local cultures. This tension between innovation and tradition is at the heart of the debate. On the one hand, some see synodality and enculturation as an opportunity to strengthen the Church's role in today's world. On the other hand, some fear that these changes could lead to a gradual departure from the Church's main mission to safeguard and faithfully transmit the truth of the Catholic faith. Traditionalists see the changes proposed by Pope Francis as a concrete danger to the integrity of Catholic worship. For them, the liturgy isn't just a cultural expression or a platform for local creativity. It's a sacred act that goes beyond time and space, a special bridge between humans and the divine. Changing too much, in their view, risks weakening the universal nature of the liturgy and its main purpose: to guide the soul towards God. The Latin Mass, with its solemnity and deep sense of mystery, is often seen by traditionalists as the purest expression of the Church's universality. In it, the gestures and words go beyond cultures, calling the faithful to a level of sacredness that transcends the modern world. This tension reflects a broader conflict between two visions of the Church: one as a universal institution able to overcome cultural differences with a unified liturgy, and the other as a reality that dialogues with local cultures, adapting to be more accessible and closer. Critics fear that this second perspective jeopardizes the centrality of Christ, shifting the focus from divine worship to liturgical creativity and human experience. In this context, Francis' call for a synodal theology seems to be part of a larger project, a reform that not only updates the liturgy but aims to redefine the very identity of the Church. The upcoming Jubilee in 2025, with the opening of the Holy Door, is shaping up to be a crucial event for Pope Francis's papacy. It won't just be an occasion for faith and pilgrimage, but also a platform to present the Pope's vision of a renewed Church to the world. Pope Francis has invited theologians and church leaders to develop a new cultural and social vision, inspired by the figure of Christ, one that puts values like justice, peace, and fraternity at the forefront. For the Pope, the Church must respond to the world's divisions and conflicts, embodying a social and cultural mission that reflects the humanity of Christ. This approach, however, does not fail to raise concerns. Critics fear that such an emphasis on social change could distract the Church from its true goal, the salvation of souls. They believe that the risk is reducing the spiritual and sacramental mission of the Church to an almost exclusively earthly role, transforming it into a kind of spiritual NGO, more focused on social issues than on eternal redemption. The Jubilee, therefore, could be a turning point. It will be a chance to see if Pope Francis' vision of a synodal Church, open to reforms, will win over the faithful, or if, on the contrary, it will highlight the existing divisions, fueling the debate between those who see this vision as a necessary evolution and those who instead fear a loss of the deepest essence of the Church. What do you think? If you liked the video, comment Amen. God bless you.